Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Jonathan is Bad at Games, where today we're going to be reviewing The Ball, a game that has been developed by Teotl Studios and has been released by Tripwire Interactive, which is the company that has published Killing Floor and the Red Orchestra series. So those are the kind of games they do. I'm sorry this review is coming out a little bit late. I know that I said I was going to get around to uploading, but right as I was about to start getting into some stuff, my throat went downhill. You'll see it in some of the trying videos that are coming out where I complain about it. But my throat got scratchy, and then it became sore, and then it became what I would guess is infected. I wouldn't know for sure, but it's been kind of rough. I've been coughing. It's been gross. Thought maybe I should keep back on the videos for the time being until my throat gets better, so I'm not sounding all gargly on, my recordings. But that's why it hasn't been out yet, and I know I'm just full of excuses, but I really am trying to get back on the ball. No pun intended. But here's the review that I was working on in the meantime, and I hope you guys can enjoy it. Before we get started, I want to say that I did enjoy this game, and I don't want to give you the wrong impression, because a lot of my scores are pretty low, but that doesn't mean, the game was fun. However, critically, it was a relatively average game. There was nothing super fantastically, iconic about it. It was just a fun it was a puzzle game. It was fun. It actually reminded me a lot of Portal from Valve, but it wasn't quite as powerful, I don't think. It definitely gets the fix if you're in for a puzzle game, though, so keep that in mind. It's about $9.99 on Steam. I got it on sale for about $2, I think. So I think it was worth its money, if that's what you're looking for. I don't know about $10, but I'll let you be the judge of that. You can go back and watch my playthrough of it and see for yourself. You can look at the review, listen to what I'm talking about, and maybe decide for yourself whether or not that's the kind of money you would like to spend on it. But I got it for $2, and I would say that it was definitely worth $2, if not 10. So if it's ever on sale and you think about picking it up, I'd recommend it then. So what I do for my reviews is I split it into categories and then give the review based on the average. And each category has like 3 things, and you'll see what I'm talking about here in a second. Like, for instance, the first area is mechanics, and that's where I examine the underlying machinery of the game, starting with controls, level design, and gameplay elements. And the controls, I felt, worked really well. They were simple. It reminded me of Portal, which was movement keys and pretty much 2 buttons, right? You clicked and put something down, you clicked it. It was pretty much the same thing. You had your movement keys, you had push and pull with your little gun thing to send the ball away or pull it back towards you. And I think the only other different things were you could attach the ball to things to pull it around. But overall, controls were controls. They did well. They were responsive. It was gratifying when you pushed a button and something happened. There was nothing really weak with controls. There was nothing to complain about. It worked really well. 10 points for controls. Nothing I could complain about. It all worked. Level design, however, while the levels were really well crafted for the most part, they had interesting puzzles. It worked well with the controls. The element of including the ball into the levels was really well done. It was innovative, but there were a few things like boss stages and combat areas where it did not feel as integrated. It really broke the experience. Like, 1 second you're having an adventure and you're solving puzzles, and then the next second you're trying to get around a horde of zombies that follows you at about the same speed, and killing them is obnoxious, and trying to knock them off of you is obnoxious. Excuse me. So for the most part, level design was really awesome, I thought. But there were just times when I felt things were unnecessary, and it was complicated, and it was needlessly so, and it just kind of broke you out of the experience. And so I took some points off there and gave it a 7. Gameplay elements, the puzzles, like I said, were really good. I really enjoyed some of the mechanics they introduced in puzzles, like the gravity enhancement to your sphere that put an aura around you that you could go through without gravity. I enjoyed the lava bits and the mazes and stuff like that. It was solving puzzles was gratifying and it was interesting and there was nothing wrong with that. However, there were a few things in it that just drove me nuts. Like the cubes were heavy and trying to move them. There were one thing was the needless explosives all over the place. They had landmines and big explosive balls, and they really did not do anything to add to the gameplay other than make navigation obnoxious. I remember there was an area with a room and it just had 4 explosive balls in it. And obviously it was easy to just walk around the balls. I don't really know why they had to put the balls there. I don't know what added challenge it posed. It was just a little thing that got on my nerves. And I think for that reason, that really brought the gameplay down, and the elements of it brought it down to a 5. That doesn't really make sense. I just said words, and it almost made sense, but not quite. So let me try that again. I gave it a 5 because the elements themselves, the level design was strong, but the elements themselves kind of brought the overall gameplay down. Like the cubes were heavy and obnoxious, for instance. That made solving puzzles involving cubes, although the puzzle itself was interesting, the movement of the cubes was not fun at all, and having to knock it 7 times to get it 2 inches across the floor really drove me nuts. And I think another thing for level design was there were a few things that were unresponsive, like buttons on the wall, like when you knocked them with your gun, like hitboxes. That's, I guess, the word I'm looking for. The hitboxes felt like they were off with enemies, with things on the wall, stuff like that. So that's also why I took it down to a 7. I kind of backtracked there. Don't mean to be confusing. Just thought I'd mention that while it was on my mind. So overall, mechanics, I gave a 7.3. That's the average of those 3 numbers, obviously. So moving on to graphics, which I describe as the designer's choice visually to represent the ideas presented in the game. And I started with character design, which I believed was believable. The humans looked like humans. They looked like archaeologists. They had their stereotypical like brown jackets and hats and stuff. That was cool. The enemies looked awesome. Their mechanics were obviously a little flawed, but the enemies were always like scary or intimidating, like that big guy or the worms. All the characters looked cool and realistic, and it was awesome. But there was nothing really iconic, and there's the thing I would complain about is there's nothing that really stood out from the world or like represented the world really firmly. And that's kind of complicated to explain what I mean, but it's kind of like, if you saw someone dressed as a character from a different kind of game with a main character, you would say, "Oh, that's that guy from the game." If you dressed as any of the characters in this game, no one would know that you were even trying to dress up as a character from that game. They would just think that you were a generic Mayan guy or a zombie or something like that, or a mummy. So there was nothing that really screams about this game in the character design. And I might be a little ignorant in saying that, maybe a little bit biased, but that was a complaint that I had, so I gave it a 9. I didn't take off much for it because it's a small complaint. Felt like a 9 was a good choice. World design, which is a little different from what was the other one? Level design or whatever. World design is like the wrapper around the items presented in the puzzles and stuff, like how they mesh the world onto the frame. So like the skins, not skins, that's a little weird. Maybe skins, textures, that's a better word. The way they utilize textures on the 3D models and stuff like that, as opposed to the philosophical presence of the things. So world design, I felt, was pretty awesome. I thought they utilized the steampunk atmosphere and they meshed it really elegantly with a Mayan type civilization, which I haven't seen a lot of. It wasn't your stereotypical steampunk where you're in Victorian era clothing. So that was interesting to me. I thought it was more like it wasn't like shoveling coal steampunk. It was more like a geological steampunk from an ancient civilization. I thought that was pretty interesting. The worlds were beautifully crafted, and it was a very atmospheric and adventurous area to be in. It reminded me a lot of like Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones in its appearance, and it really felt like you were doing something interesting. And one thing I complained about was spikes in lava. There was an area It was just, it's not like a serious complaint, but it stuck out to me in the video. You'll see it. But there was a place where there was a lava pit, and inside of the lava pit there were spikes, and both like lava and spikes are essentially one hit KOs, one hit kills, whatever you want to call it. So the fact that they had spikes in the lava made me kind of like wonder why they would do that in appearance. Like, I get that that's a dangerous zone. You don't need to make it more dangerous by adding another dangerous thing on top of it. Like, it's not any more or less dangerous than the other things. So it was a strange visual representation. But I'm not going to take off points for it. I gave it a 10. I really liked the world that they portrayed visually. Special effects were not so great. And by that I mean, like, unidentifiable, okay? The ball glowed sometimes. I never really understood why it glowed. That's one thing that I couldn't really identify. The second thing was oil. The way it looked, it didn't really look like oil in my opinion. I didn't realize it was oil until I lit it on fire and killed myself, pretty much. And there were times where there were lightning, when you chained the lightning to the ball, or electricity rather, instead of like making it look visually interesting when you got further away and kind of like making it look like there was more lightning being chained, it looked like the same amount of lightning but stretched out, and that kind of bugged me a little bit. There was also let's see what else visually, what else was there? Fire looked like fire, but basically, like, it worked once you were able to figure out what certain things were meant to look like, but overall they weren't really impressive. They were hard to identify at the first sight. Oh, another thing, like the anti-gravity stuff, I understood that after I did it and thought it was really cool, but visually there wasn't a whole lot to go off of. It was just like the ball was radiating some sort of field. Was it? I thought maybe it was magnetic or something, and then finally I got it. That's something. When the ball magnetized a bunch of nails and then you pushed a button and it shot them out, I didn't really understand what was going on there, especially since I was standing close to it. If it could break wood, would it not kill me? Like, stuff like that. Stuff, inconsistent things, unidentifiable things, stretching things. Like, mechanically it worked, and you could understand what was going on after you figured out what was being represented. But until that time, it was a little confusing, it was a little muddled, it wasn't very impressive, so I gave it a 4, and overall graphics got a 7.6 because of that, probably got dragged down. Moving on from graphics, we get to sounds, which I'm not like an auditory expert, but this is my opinion on how well, like, the choices the the people made in putting like music and sound effects within the game, enhancing the player's experience and understanding of the world around them. The sounds were not the most impressive part of the game, which is kind of ironic because I believe it's got the highest score. But the choices they made were pretty useful, which is where it gets its points. Like, voice acting was really bland. It was really bland. Like, aside from the narrator, I think, reading off of the tablets, there was like hardly any emotion, and it was very generic. It was very generic in what they said. And it was really uncomfortably bad. It was kind of cringeworthy, actually, a little bit. But the good thing and the strong choice that they made was that there was not a lot of it. Most of the levels were you solving puzzles and progressing through the world as opposed to the story and having to hear someone talk to you, which is good. That's great, because the fact that there was not a lot of it is what made the cringeworthy parts kind of like separate from the really good parts that you can enjoy and have fun with. The voice acting would have ruined the game if there were more of it. So that because they didn't put a lot in there, I'm going to kind of like excuse how bad it was and give it a 6 as opposed to like a 4 or a 3, because that choice not to include it that was a good choice. Music I really liked. I thought it was fitting and ambient. I put unintrusive twice. I don't know why I did that, but I did. So it was unintrusive, and by that I kind of mean like it wasn't really like punchy. Like, it wasn't like a lot of drums and rhythmic and stuff like that. It was just ambient and out of the way, and it was there if you needed something to hear. Like, if you just, it filled the sound space without like infecting your mind with like a catchy beat or something like that. Something like A lot of people think good music is stuff that you would listen to on your own, stuff like that, and I agree for the most part. But in a game like this, I thought that having it ambient and just in the background was a strong choice. I thought that the fact that it wasn't showy or flashy made it better for this game specifically. So I went ahead and gave that a 10, even though like the music wasn't top notch, special, awesome. I thought it was a strong choice for the game. Sound effects were effective, but there were some quality issues, like a couple of garbled sounds, in my opinion. Kind of sounded like the quality wasn't quite as high, like the quality of the microphone that was recording these sounds, or however it was done. There was a couple of areas where it was obviously a sound effect and not a part of the game. I think it was in a couple of the creatures' roars or something. So I went ahead and gave that an 8. And overall, the average of the sounds, in my opinion, was an 8. Moving on from sounds, we get to the writing, which was by far the weakest part of this game. If you're wanting to play a game for story, this is not the game you're going to be looking for. The story had an interesting concept. Like I said, the world was really impressive looking, and I felt like there could have been a lot there, but the story overall was weak. I mean, for God's sake, you fall down a hole, or a long hole. You fall down like several stories at least, and your archaeologist friend who did not fall is yelling down a hole at you to just get up and walk around instead of doing the safe thing like stay put, tend to your wounds, whatever happened when you fell. And that's pretty much how the story starts, and I gotta say that's pretty weak for me. If you fall that far, you should stay put. They'll get you out of there. There was no need for you to go trouncing around in the underground worlds of Mayan hell or whatever. And I felt like the story overall needed more world building. Like I said, the world was really interesting, the world that they put you in, but the story itself was really lacking. There wasn't a whole lot there. Everything was told through the really bland dialogue and some vague tablets. As you progress through the story, he would read the hieroglyphs, but overall it was really vague, and they didn't really utilize the world that they had built, and I felt that was kind of disappointing. So story overall got a 6. Dialogue, of course, was weak, like, hey, look around down there after you got hurt again. It was sparse, which was a good choice, so I gave it an 8. Like, you didn't have a lot of people talking. You didn't have the character trying to internal monologue anything. It was just, I thought it was a good choice not to have a lot of dialogue because it gave you, the player, the chance to form your own opinions, solve your own puzzles, and just see the world for what it is, as opposed to trying to see it through the character's eyes in a way that kind of made you feel like you were the character, because you were the one doing the things, you were the one thinking, you were the one being you, and I thought that was pretty cool. Enrichment came in the form of hidden artifacts. There wasn't a whole lot to shape the world otherwise. There wasn't any uh, you know, posters or anything like that that could give you insight to the world that are kind of optional other than the hidden artifacts, but they were also kind of vague and uninteresting, and they kind of just like added flavor but no substance, which I felt was a little disappointing because I kind of wanted substance when I go and hunt down these things or solve a different puzzle to get this thing specifically, and it wasn't there. So that got a 6. Overall, writing was given a 6.6. Not a lot there. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Overall, it was bad. In a couple of areas, it was okay, like the dialogue. The last thing I have is the fun factor, which is pretty much where I lump everything else, how well the game does at making people want to play it. And the 3 categories are autonomy, reward, and immersion. Basically, I feel like you want to feel like you're in control of the action, or the choice of how much you are in control of the action is important in a story for design wise. Like, obviously some games they don't want you in control of the action. That's fine, you can sit back and play through it like an interactive movie. That's great. Sometimes, like open world games, autonomy is good because you want to feel like you're the one doing it. That's also great. Autonomy in this game, there were large levels, but there were large levels for you to explore. They were really big. You can sometimes go really far off into the distance. The invisible walls were really distant. However, there was not always a lot of reason to do so. There wasn't like interesting things to find. There weren't any Easter eggs aside from one thing, which was like the developer's name hidden away in a vent. There was really the artifacts weren't hidden everywhere. So there was a time I remember distinctly where I went all the way out of this building, took like 5 minutes to walk or swim rather across this chasm to see what was on the other end, and it ended up being a waterfall, and I had to swim all the way back because there was no way to get back onto land or anything like that. It was, it was a big level. Visually, it looked good, but I would have, for the first time in my life, preferred like invisible walls to keep you from going somewhere that would waste your time. The story was like a railway story. It wasn't like there weren't multiple choices or branching paths or anything like that. It was like you go here, you do that, you go there, you solve that puzzle. Strong. Again, it was strong for this. There were a few divergences. It wasn't like super big, but there was like one place I know of for sure, maybe two, where you could diverge off of the main path and find a secondary path and get yourself like a collectible. But for the most part, it was pretty straightforward. Go here, do that, go there, do that. It worked well for the game because, again, games solving puzzles. It's not meant to be a game where you're going out and exploring everything. Strong choice there. Keeps you focused, keeps you moving. The bad choice, I would say, is that there was only one answer for every puzzle. I'm not sure if that's a bad thing or a good thing. Honestly, I just watched like a video on how solving puzzles worked, and I felt like there could have been more development to the puzzles. I don't know. Maybe the one answer for every puzzle thing. That's debatable. Oh god, I left something from Octodad's. I'm just so imperfect on everything I do. That's not even funny. The ties, yes. Do you remember me collecting the ties in the ball? No, because that's left over from the Octodad review. That's my bad. But one thing that is good is they had different modes. I didn't play through a lot of them. I know that there's a survival map with that is like Portal 2 blended in with this game. It's got GLaDOS. It's got stuff like that. That's pretty awesome. I played one survival map. I didn't record it, so you can't see it, but basically it's puzzle solving, obviously. Or at least it was for the Portal one. I didn't play any of the other ones, but they have a survival mode. I don't know if they have any other modes, but there's that. Gives you a little bit of choice. So overall I gave that an 8. Rewards. The rewards basically came mostly from solving the puzzles, and those puzzles were, when they were there, they were really satisfying because, solving a puzzle is fun. When you solve a puzzle, you feel like you've accomplished something. That's where the rewards came in. Collectibles, however, were not inspiring. I felt like I was collecting puzzles. Like if you're into collecting things, there's that. Like if you're a completionist and you want 10 out of 10, then you can go for the collectibles. People like me who wanted story, it felt like I was forcing myself to collect them. I ended up not collecting them all because I just couldn't bring myself to care anymore. And it was really sad because the collectibles they had the opportunity to do something really great and just kind of dropped the ball for me. The achievements were also poorly conceived in my opinion. Steam achievements anyway. I don't know if they're on different platforms, but they had like an achievement for running over a set amount of monkeys, killing a certain amount of enemies. And in a puzzle game, you kind of want the achievements to be something that you're doing in a puzzle game, not necessarily like in a game where the combat's so weak. Seeing achievements that are about killing things is just really, it doesn't feel good at all. It doesn't like inspire me to go out and do these things. It's just like, well, there's an achievement I'm not gonna get. So the achievements were kind of lackluster, but the puzzles carried it. It was a puzzle game, and the puzzles were done really well. So I went ahead and gave the reward a 10. Please understand that is where the reward comes from. If you're not into puzzles, then you're probably not going to enjoy the game, because everything else kind of sucks. Combat sucks, collectibles suck, achievements suck. This is a puzzle game. Story sucks. That's pretty much it. If you like the puzzles, you're going to like the game. That's what this game is. It's a puzzle game. Rewards come from puzzles. 10 points. The immersion was almost impossible because aside from what I mentioned where the story doesn't drive you to thinking for the character, you're thinking for yourself. Aside from that, you don't really like connect with this world. You understand almost at all times that you're playing a puzzle game, and it's got a nice wrapper, and you want to be immersed, but it never really quite happens. You never feel like you're adventuring in the game. You feel like you're playing an adventure game, and I feel like the immersion had so much potential, and that is like it did not work out for me. The immersion was just broken, in my opinion, by poor storytelling, poor mechanics, things like that. So overall, fun factor gave a 7. Now, in review, bottom line, I got 3 options that I usually do. I do the pessimist view, where if you think that a game is only as strong as its weakest components, like I take the lowest score, and that's what the game is, pessimism. Like it's like, well, that was only this, so that's the whole game. If you view it that way, then I would probably give the game a 6.6 or a D in school terms. It wasn't a very strong game, and the weakest component, that's what that was. So there you go. If you're a pessimist, look no further. This game is 6.6 tops. If you're a realist and you want to weight the scores, the game should be like held to its strengths and weaknesses equally. All the parts work together to make a game, and they should all be kind of weighted in the decision. It's a 7.3, which is about a C. It's better than the D, but it's still a pretty average game all around. It's just an average game. There's nothing special about it. If you're an optimist and you believe that you should encourage strengths and not really focus on the weaknesses, then I'd give it a 7.6, which is where I weighted some of the scores. Normally they're all by 20%. I boost some to 35% and lower the weaker ones to 5%. And that's how I weight them. So the weaker scores, like the I think it was writing. Is writing the weakest one? I think so. Okay. I don't know. I just passed through it. I'm a little bit tired, so I don't quite remember what was on the last slide. But anyway, I took the strongest one, which was the 8. I think that was sounds. I took sounds. I boosted that up to 35% when I calculated them, and then I took writing, and I took that down to 5%. And I did that with the other two, the second strongest and the second weakest, second weakest, and overall the score was boosted up to a 7.6, so give or take around 0.3 points. It's still a C, but it's a high C. It's almost a B. Actually, one more point, it would have been a B minus. So that's where I stand on that, and that's what I would say the game is. Overall, it was a pretty average game. It's pretty awesome. I had fun playing it, but critically, it wasn't the best game. Again, so if you think it's worth $10, you go for it. I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't tell you not to. It was an okay game for what it was. For $10, I'd say it was pretty good. A couple things could be worked on, obviously, like there were a couple of trial and error puzzles that kind of got on my nerves, but I don't think it was supposed to be that way. I think that was because of something on my end with a graphics issue, and I just didn't want to restart, so I had to do trial and error. But other than that, the puzzles were really strong. And if you enjoyed Portal 2 and until Portal 3 comes out, you're like, I really want to do a simplistic puzzling game that's like 3D and somewhat spatial and using resources in a certain way to encourage a certain outcome, this game would be for you. It's a pretty good game. Valve took a liking to him and did a collaboration for a survival map. It was Portal themed. There's some Portal there. If you want some GLaDOS, she's there. Overall, it's a pretty interesting game. Wasn't the best game, wasn't the worst game, but it was an interesting game, and you'd probably enjoy the experience for the most part if you played it. So there you go. That's my opinion on the ball. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Test my lava with my face. Be sure it's hot enough to melt it off. I did the thing. What?
Thomas! Don't you run from me!
Oh.
Since when can I do that?